The Sports Time Podcast.
Speaking of basketball, of course, we'll talk about the NBA Finals. But before I kind of want to mention the Olympic team. Seem like they're struggling a little bit. I know they lost, I think, on Monday and Tuesday. They ended up winning on, I think, Wednesday. But why do you think the Olympic team is struggling? Because even though they don't have LeBron or Kawhi, they still have Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, still, in my opinion, top 5 players. Why do you think they're struggling a little bit? And maybe it's because of, Popovich is, he's a great coach, but it's kind of a different style. But why do you think they're struggling so much this Olympics?
Yeah, I think part of it is in large part due to the fact that, think about, like you noted, Gregg Popovich changing of the guard some because Mike Krzyzewski not really being that coach for them anymore, and all that he had built, and he had normally people knew how things worked with Mike Krzyzewski. There was a level of familiarity there to some degree, but Gregg Popovich now stepping in and doing the Olympic team, in ways, yeah, you get some time to work out and fix all the little nicks in your armor, but to some degree, the amount of time that you get to prepare and stuff like that, especially depending on how late some of these players are playing into the postseason, then you're essentially only getting the amount of time similar to an all-star team gets to practice with each other and their coaches and stuff, but you just don't have the top tier high-end talent. Because if other teams in other countries, like basketball is an international sport at this point, so a lot of people are catching up, and you're seeing that there's a lot of talent, as we see with Luka Doncic and other players. We're seeing talent in other countries and areas start to become at a higher tier versus where it was in the past. So now, if we're just throwing together a team, even though the NBA is still the highest level of basketball, you're just throwing together a team, and you're really only giving these guys an all-star team's length of time to practice, and you're throwing them in with a coach that doesn't have a built-in system already with the Olympic program. You can have instances where you falter and have these losses.
Yeah, it's a little different. And yeah, again, you always kind of forget that Mike Krzyzewski had a really good relationship with most of these players. And of course, Pop has a different type of the way he does things. I'm a Spurs fan, but he does it almost completely different than any other coaches. Here's what Gregg Popovich had to say after a loss. I believe it was on Monday or Tuesday.
Let me also answer that question. You asked the same sort of question, the same family of question last time, where you assume things that are not true. When you just mentioned, blowing these teams out, that's never happened. So I don't know where you get that. Can I finish?
No, I mean,
can I finish?
You're saying that's not true. Your average margin.
Can I finish my statement?
Like 30 points a game. In those last two tournaments, I was talking.
Can I finish my statement? Okay. When you talk.
You just told me that it's not true, and I'm telling you your average margin.
Are you going to let me finish my statement or not? So you'll be quiet now while I talk, and then I'll listen to you. When you make statements about in the past just blowing out these other teams, number one, you give no respect to the other teams. And I talked to you last time about the same thing. We've had very close games against 4 or 5 countries in all these tournaments. So the good teams do not get blown out. There are certain games that might happen in one of the tournaments, in the World Championship, the Olympics, where somebody gets blown out. But in general, nobody's blowing anybody out for the good teams. So when you make a statement like that, it's like you assume that's what's going on. And that's incorrect.
As we continue with the Olympics, do you think they'll be able to win a gold medal for the 3rd or 4th straight time?
I think they can. I think when you have the top talent in any league, you have a good chance to come out as the victor. But it's so much different than in the NBA, because in the NBA you're playing a series of games. So in the postseason, it's the best of 7. So you get multiple chances at it. And normally the most talented team is going to win out in that instance. But when it's just one shot, and if you're playing a team that has Luka Doncic now, because Luka's not playing for Team USA, and you're playing his team, and maybe that team is just hot on the right day, and you can have a very capable chance of losing to that team because these other teams are just they have more talent now. So I think they're still the favorites to win the gold medal, but they do have realistic chances of losing.
Yeah, you just mentioned Luka, and I think Luka even said that in his country, I think winning a gold medal would be more important than winning the NBA Finals. And I think he even said that too, that, winning a gold medal would be bigger than winning an NBA championship, which is kind of shocking. But at the same time, to beat the U.S. or to win the gold medal and the U.S. doesn't, that's really big. Like, U.S., of course, is the best country in basketball in the world. So, and of course, winning the gold medal would be so big, which is, you don't really think about that. But with players from other countries, they're kind of shocked. And it seems like a lot of the big players now, half of them are from outside the country or not from the U.S. Like, you got Luka Doncic, Jokic, Joel Embiid. There's a few other players, Rudy Gobert. There's just a bunch of players that are not from the U.S. And you look at the Spurs back in the day, half of them weren't even from the country of the U.S. So it is interesting how, it's really that important. You mentioned earlier before we started recording that Trey Young was kept off the U.S. Olympic team, and he kind of took some shots a few days ago. What do you think about that? And do you think, it's kind of shocking that Trey Young was left off the U.S. team.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that was a point of contention a lot of people had, especially when we saw like Kevin Love being included on the team, and people were like, well, you could have included another guard spot, especially with a guy as talented as Trey. But I felt like at least the explanation from Team USA was the fact that they felt like they were lacking in big men strength. But now in terms of that slight that Trey felt from being left off the team, it's kind of interesting with Bradley Beal going through COVID protocol now and them having to find a replacement. It is interesting to see how that's going to play out, because part of the reason why I think Team USA also struggles when I've watched their games is the fact that they don't have a true point guard. And all the Team USAs of the past, whether it was Jason Kidd, Chris Paul, or whomever, they had at least a guy that was closer to a true point than a scoring guard. Damian Lillard's more of a shooting guard than he is a point guard. And at times you can tell that this team, they're so talented, they can just come up the floor and play ISO basketball, but that's just not going to get it done sometimes. And when the rules are different here and they're expecting to get certain foul calls and stuff like that, you see guys flopping and they're getting angry because they're not getting calls, and it's like, dude, it's just a different league.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of a loss for the U.S. for keeping Trey Young off. And I think, with the way Trey Young showed this postseason, I think I don't know if he's a top 5 point guard yet, but I think he's somewhere in there. And I think within a few years he could be, or of course he is the future of the league, but in a few years he could be considered a top 3 point guard. But
I think, man, look, if we're talking about top 5 point guards, bro, he has a legitimate case, man. Like, if you're Eastern Conference Finals, like, obviously we know this season was riddled with injuries and stuff like that impacted it. But look, you got guys like Steph, you got Dame, you got Chris Paul, and then after you get through that tier, like those top 3 guys, it's like, okay, well then who are we? It's like a pick 'em almost, because then you start bringing up dudes like Russell Westbrook and other players, but it's like, well, Trey just got to the Eastern Conference Finals, and like, how much respect do you pay and credence to that?
Yeah, I think Trey Young, you just mentioned Russell Westbrook. I think within a year or two, I think Russell Westbrook as how good Russell Westbrook is, I feel like Trey Young within a year or two could surpass Westbrook, just because Trey Young's probably going to get farther in the playoffs, because if Westbrook stays in Washington, I don't think he's going anywhere outside the first round. Yeah. And then, of course, like I said, yeah, you have the 3 kind of top point guards in the league. Like you said, you got Lillard, you got Curry. I'm not exactly sure where Kyrie ranks, but I think he's somewhere in the top 5. And I think Luka's considered more of a point guard.
That's what makes it weird, right? Like, it's these hybrids. Yeah. Is James Harden a point guard? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to classify the guys.
Yeah, because I think Luka did come out of the draft as a shooting guard, I think, and he is 6'6", so he's kind of got that. Magic Johnson was 6'9" or something like that, and you have LaMelo Ball is 6'6", 6'7", and he's kind of a 1/2. I guess Lonzo's more of a shooting guard, but yeah, there's so many hybrids now, and maybe you don't go top 5 point guards. Maybe you just go the top 10 players in the league, because again, there's just so many hybrids, and of course there's not really a true center anymore. Is it a power forward? Is it a center? But yeah, so it's crazy how that works, and how, the last few years it's gone completely different from positionless basketball, as I would say. And you just mentioned Bradley Beal, or you mentioned earlier Bradley Beal's not going to be playing. He tested positive for COVID, or is in the COVID protocols. Who do you? I don't think they've replaced anybody yet, or replaced him with anybody yet. But who do you think the best option to replace Bradley Beal would be?
I personally feel like it was going to be Trey Young. I felt like Trey Young would be a really good replacement. I felt like maybe a guy like DeMar DeRozan maybe was a good replacement because he has that relationship with Popovich to some degree. So he really kind of knows Popovich's scheme, how he likes to coach things up, and he's played Olympic basketball before. But I think that Trey Young was my ideal person that I would have put in there, honestly.
Yeah, and I don't know. I did hear some Anthony Edwards talk, but I think he sprained his ankle, so I don't think he'll be eligible. I don't know. I think Trey Young would be the best option. But speaking of Bradley Beal, do you think he'll still be in Washington after this offseason?
Man, it's so tough because of the fact that I know he loves Washington. Like, I used to live in the DC metropolitan area, and I know how much he really has a connection to that city. And I feel like he wants to make it work there, but I feel as though it might not even be his choice at some point. I feel as though he wants to make it work, but the Wizards are kind of just going to realize, look, we're going to hit a point where we're going to have diminishing returns on this because he's going to eventually hit 30, or he's going to start to come down from that peak. And we got to get the most assets we can for him at this point while his value is at its highest. So after this season, I mean, if it ends, I think they're probably going to give the Russ and Bradley Beal thing another go, since this year was so impacted by COVID and injuries. But I think after this upcoming season, they probably will try to be more aggressive looking for trades for him, because it's always been we're not trading Bradley Beal. But I mean, how much losing can you do? Like, dang.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really hard to see. And I don't honestly think I think either Westbrook or Bradley Beal is going to be traded during this offseason, but it will be interesting to see if they keep them and what will they add from that Wizards team, because again, I don't know if a lot of free agents, and the free agency isn't that great this year, so you'll probably see a lot of trades. Yeah. But I just don't know what Washington can really bring. And again, if you're a top free agent, do you really want to go to DC? It's really interesting. It's going to be interesting what they do with their coach, because it seems like I think it was Wes Unseld Jr. is the projected head coach, or I can't remember now. I think he's the front runner. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye. Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sports Town Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the right.